Welcome. Awesome. My name is Yvonne. We're just going to give a couple more minutes as we get ready for this amazing creator workshop. I'm super excited to be kicking this off, but we're just going to give it a couple more minutes as everyone is streaming in to the Zoom call. Perfect. And actually, as people are waiting, we love to get a sense of who's in the room. And we created a poll, a Zoom poll that we'll be sharing with everyone to get a sense of what brings you here today, whether or not you're a creator, if you're looking to learn and connect with other creators. This is an awesome opportunity to do so, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And whether or not you're considering launching your own thing, Judd here is going to be talking about that for the next hour or so. And whether or not you're just here because you thought this sounded interesting and you're a fan of popular information in CUNY, that's a totally legitimate answer as well. But if you can just take a second to fill out the poll, I think that'll actually tell us a lot about how to ask these questions and get the most out of Judd here, who's graciously shared his time with us. So I can see we've got 33, 34 answers in the poll right now. And Judd, can you see this poll?
Yeah, I see it.
Perfect. So this is going to be really helpful for our conversation today. We're just going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Hope everyone had an awesome weekend. Hey, Renata, welcome. Yogesh, welcome. Perfect. Cool. So just to kick things off, just a brief introduction from us. My name is Yvonne Liao, and you guys are watching the Creator Workshop series hosted and organized by CUNY J+. What we're trying to do here is really trying to help journalists think about their entrepreneurial next steps. And what we're doing is inviting amazing, talented creators who have walked the walk, done the work, and have lessons to share about their experiences. And so today, we have our speaker, Judd Legum, a longtime journalist and entrepreneur. He was the former founder and editor-in-chief of Think Progress, a progressive political news site, for about 6 years before he started his own Substack newsletter called Popular Information. And if you're not already familiar with this newsletter, you absolutely should be. It has about 165,000 subscribers, and about 10% of those are paid for about $50 a year. All trying to geek out about very important political journalism. So Judd and his team have been working about popular information, and we're going to be talking about the early stages of the creator journey. Now, before I jump in, Judd, I really want to make a plug for this Journalism Creators Program. One quick announcement is that our next 100-day program is going to be taking place on February 4th. So please apply if you're even remotely interested in developing a newsletter, podcast, or any type of creator project and you want to boost. Jeremy Kaplan is here and he is the director of that program. He is also going to be leading an open house this Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. If you have any questions about the application process and want an inside peek, we also have Hillary Fry, who is my fellow creator in residence here, who is also a great resource if you have any questions. Thanks, Hillary, about what it means to be a creator. So with that, Judd, we're here to talk about branding and really try and go deep because you've had so much experience launching really hugely successful projects, brands, companies. So branding typically has a bit of a negative connotation. People sometimes think about it as, oh, it's about being an influencer, having as much Twitter followers as possible. But really, I think branding has a very strategic part of the company and the brand and the creator building process. So can you tell us how you think about branding and what it means to you?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I probably don't think of it on a day-to-day basis as branding per se. I mean, I don't go around thinking about, well, how do I build my brand? How do I enhance my brand? But I do think it's very important that the readers of my newsletter, people who follow me on Twitter, other people who are on the other side of the content that we're producing have a clear understanding of what we're about. And I think about with each issue, how does it fit into the kind of larger sweeping narratives and issues that we're focused on. So that's something that I am very intentional about. And I also think through the process, I've been doing the newsletter full time. It'll be 4 years in July, so about 3.5 years right now. And I found that as time goes on, I've realized that really focusing on my what I've come to believe are my strengths and casting and pushing aside some other things has enhanced my brand and allowed me to be more successful. So I think I am involved in this brand building process, although in my head it's more about thinking about how can I produce the best work and how can I communicate most clearly to the audience what that work is and why it's important.
That's excellent. And I couldn't agree more. Let's flash back to 3 or 4 years ago when you were just developing the idea for popular information. How were you thinking about the brand then, and how are you thinking about it now?
I think as I look back, I had no idea what I was going to be doing.
I love
You know,
that. I
I was
appreciate that.
I was attracted, and it was a little more nascent at this point. Not that the idea of having a newsletter was new, but the idea of, maybe you could write a newsletter, be on your own, have people pay for it, and that could be a job, was a little bit less established. There were really no political newsletters on Substack. There weren't that many people on Substack to begin with. And I was more attracted to that structure, the idea that um, I could be totally independent, that I wouldn't have anyone telling me what to do, any pressures, any outside influences, and really dive into my passions. Um, but I think at that time, I was kind of scattered as to what my strengths really were. I, did a number of articles kind of that I would say are more diving into kind of the take economy, my views on polling, my views on, how you should think about this issue. And it wasn't until I really got into the process of doing it and also then getting that feedback from the readers of what people were responding to, what seemed to be making an impact, that I started to develop what I think now people would think of as the brand of popular information, which is heavily reliant on kind of research, data, the FEC filings, the SEC filings, and corporate accountability and accountability in general. Those were things that I was touching on, but I hadn't. It's not like when I conceived of it, I was like, yes, I'm going to be doing this thing. It's going to be focused on accountability journalism. It's going to be holding corporations, kind of to the fire, putting them under a microscope. I didn't have all that worked out. I kind of came to it as I got into the process of just writing 4 of these things a week and seeing what happens. So I think that's been very valuable to me.
I appreciate that because I do think early days of beginning anything are just extremely messy. And to hear that from someone who has built a very successful newsletter, it's actually kind of comforting and kind of liberating to feel like, okay, you don't need to have it all figured out. But tell us a little bit more then about, if you can take yourself back then, what were some of the signals you were looking for as you were testing things out, and how did you ultimately arrive like, okay, now this is what I'm going to pursue, and we're going to keep investing in these more research driven pieces versus anything else
Yeah.
that you could be writing about?
So, and so in the beginning, it wasn't that I wasn't going to do research, but I had a number of things I thought I was, maybe going to do a series of Q&As. I was going to do these more analytical pieces, and I was kind of trying all of that out, um, from day to day, different topics. And what I realized is, as I started, I had a lot of experience as a researcher. I mean, that's something that I had always done, even as I kind of shifted to different stages of my career. I went to law school, practiced as an attorney for a while. I was on political campaigns. I ran for office, but I always did research. And so I found, really in 2018, probably the first time as I started doing research into Steve King's campaign contributions, and just looking at who his corporate contributors were. Because at the time, Steve King, who's now out of Congress because he really too directly embraced white nationalist themes. Eventually, the Republican Party kicked him off of the committees, and then he was defeated in a primary. But at the time in 2018, he was still fine. And what I found was there were major corporations, AT&T, others, who were still donating thousands of dollars to him. So I just thought that was interesting, because I was observing him get more and more radicalized. I believe he had endorsed a fairly open white nationalist candidate for mayor in Canada. That's what initially attracted my attention. And what happened was when I put this out, companies started announcing that they would stop donating to him, and which I wasn't really anticipating. But that whole process, and of course that became a news story. And when people wrote that news story, they noted, many of them at least, that the news had been first highlighted by the Popular Information newsletter, and so that creates all sorts of positive effects. Your readers who are with you there, they like to see that. Hey, I read this, and now I'm seeing it in the Washington Post, or these other major places. I'm reading this, and it's having an impact on the world. Things are happening. People are responding to it. And so that's when I first kind of came to realize that, this is something that I know how to do, that I don't think a lot of other people are doing in this way. And it's having a beneficial effect on the business as well. And actually, the other thing was, this is what I enjoy doing. Like, I feel more invigorated by doing that than I do by, sharing my opinions about the role of polling in politics. I have those opinions and I can talk to people about them, and I still have takes and different views on various subjects, but I feel better when I produce a newsletter that has that original research and reporting in it. And so it didn't happen immediately where I was like, okay, now I'm 100% all in on this, but just over time, just more and more of my time and energy went into producing that kind of content.
That's great. And it sounds like it was a combination of a bit of serendipity, where you kind of, this article that you enjoyed producing, or this reporting that you enjoyed reporting on, ended up having a tremendous impact and a ripple effect across a lot of media organizations. And I'm going to take a quick second to just recap the poll. Most 71% of people here are creators, and they're looking to learn more about other creators as well as the process of doing so. I also want to just tell people who are joining us that the format here is Judd and I are going to be talking for the next 30 minutes, and then we're going to be opening up to audience Q&A. But if you have any questions as we are talking, put it in the chat, and Jeremy Kaplan is going to flag that towards the end, and we'll be going back and forth between audience questions in the chat and people who actually want to ask Judd a question on the Zoom call. So that's going to be the format. And at the very end, there'll actually be 10 to 15 minutes for creators to just join breakout sessions and actually meet one another. Judd will be signing off at that point, but it will still be great just to kind of bring the community together. So that's the format. And then Judd, when you were talking about, even before, let's go back to before you were launching Popular Information. Newsletter doesn't exist yet. It's very cool to see how some of the signals were just pretty obvious. Like, this is the direction you want to go. It was intrinsic. You enjoyed it, as well as it was having an impact on the business as well as society at large. But I've noticed, for instance, Popular Information doesn't necessarily have an Instagram or Facebook page, but I don't think it actually has a Twitter handle either. And how were you thinking about just kind of differentiating your persona and your presence on the internet compared to launching something in Popular Information? Were those two things very distinct to you, or did you, from the early days, really believe that you are Popular Information and it was really important for people to kind of have that association?
No, I think my end goal is to create an identity and a longevity for Popular Information that will go beyond my ability to do it. I'm very happy doing it, so I don't really plan on going leaving and doing something else. But eventually I will stop one way or the other, and I hope that the newsletter lives on because I do think it has an important place in the ecosystem. But the reason why it doesn't have a Twitter handle is really just a matter of time and focus. One of the things that I'm very cognizant of as I take this on is that it's a lot to produce 4 newsletters a week. It to me it's a lot of work. Not necessarily the writing I have practice with. I can write, but just coming up with 4 ideas that I think are good enough to do a newsletter. It's just a lot of time and attention, and there's a lot of work that goes in just to getting to that place to get the idea. Once I get the idea, I'm more comfortable, but just coming up with the idea that I feel good enough about. And so with Twitter, I already have an account. I'm obviously going to have to utilize that account to promote the newsletter. It would be foolish for me not to, because I already had several 100,000 people when I started this newsletter. So I wasn't going to let that audience there. And I didn't want to essentially waste my time right then building up another Twitter account from scratch. It just didn't seem like a good use of my time because I wanted to focus on the newsletter. Now, over time, after about 2 years, I hired one person to work with me full time. She focuses mostly on research, but I then another year later hired another person. So now we have 3 people on the team, including myself, and that third person has helped me launch an Instagram account. It's still very nascent.
Mhm.
I think we have I have I'm not sure exactly where I'm at, but 520,000 some people on Twitter. It's a big driver of subscribers. For the newsletter, I think we have 2,600 right now on Instagram. We started from 0, but I think before she joined, we maybe had 400 or 500 because I wasn't even posting anything to it. It was just a name. But over the long term, I'm hoping that grows, and maybe one day we'll have 20,000, maybe one day we'll have 200,000. But you know, it took time for me to develop the capacity to do that. And so that's really what it's about. It's not about the brand being me, but it's about developing the capacity and prioritizing what's going to be important for growth. And to me, the number one thing that helps you grow the newsletter is just to write good newsletters. And that's what I need to focus the majority of my time on.
That's such a good reminder. It's incredibly pragmatic, but the emphasis on prioritizing your goals and your most essential tasks as a creator is it's critical. It's like mission critical. To kind of talk back, you mentioned exactly how much your Twitter following really drives traffic and subscriptions. And in your opening launch tweet, which I think is still pinned on your Twitter handle, you kind of talked about, you're launching this new political newsletter. It's called Popular Information. It's for people who give a damn, which I love. But I'm curious if there was thought into why you wanted to frame Popular Information in that particular way and what you were trying to communicate to people. It's a little bit, we're getting into the nitty gritty, but I think it would be helpful just to give people a window into your thought process. There's a lot of political stories out there. There's a bunch of hot takes. So why did you tweet that, and what were you trying to convey?
When I first started thinking about a newsletter, and this is a different time, even though it wasn't that long ago, 2017, 2018. For several months, actually, when I first got the idea, I'd convinced myself that it wasn't possible. It wasn't going to work. And so I sort of just had it in the back of my mind. I was thinking about other stuff, but I wasn't really thinking about this. And part of the reason was that, there were lots of pretty good free newsletters that covered political topics, whether it's Politico Playbook, Axios has one. There's a bunch of them, and they do a pretty good job of covering the political landscape, especially if you're a political junkie. I still get these emails and read them. But then I came up with the concept that these newsletters are really about people who are kind of not necessarily situated in DC, but sort of DC, one way or the other. They're political insiders. They're looking for the inside scoop. Whether that's a lobbyist, whether that's somebody else who works on Capitol Hill, whether that's people on campaigns. That's really the audience. So I thought that there was a space for you know, for more of a populist, and that's where that give a damn comes from, more of a populist approach, really trying to appeal to people all over the country who are just engaged in politics, who really care about the issues and what's happening with the country, and focus not on the sort of DC insider. Of course, if you can cause enough trouble, you'll get some DC insiders to subscribe. So I think I've got a pretty good number of them now. But that wasn't really my target demographic. My target was the person who was in, if you look at, let's say, a small town or a large town, and you think about the 5 or 10% of the people who live there who are really politically engaged and really care about what's going on, that's who I'm trying to reach. And so once I kind of came up with that idea, one, that I was going to target those people, and two, that instead of trying to cover all of the things I was going to pick. Now, at the beginning, I thought maybe I was going to just have 3 topics per newsletter. But quickly, I realized that the best thing to do is just have 1 topic per newsletter. And actually, I think a lot of people now realize this too, especially sort of in the Substack world, where you don't try to do this, kind of digest format. Just because there's a lot of digests out there that are good. I'm not going to try to recreate Politico. Politico has 8, I don't know how many people they have, but they have a whole team of people who are producing their newsletter. They're going to do a good job of that. I'm not going to have necessarily a better digest, but I can take 1 topic and I can go in more depth and get some new reporting, some new information, some new perspective, and then that can, and especially thinking about not what's important for people who are hyper focused on, what's the next thing that's going to be taken up by the Senate, but people who are just what's the next thing that's going to impact this country and the world, and focus on those people.
That's fantastic. And I really appreciate how specific you are on that user persona. Even prior, I mean, as the launch happens, and clearly there's a bit of a splash, there was some media coverage on it. And there's a Wired article talking a little bit more about popular information, I'm sure among other outlets covering it. How did you get that PR? And what was your process in even deciding, oh, I want to talk to Wired? Or did you just want to talk to as many people as possible to just try and get the word out? What was your thought process there?
Well, at the time, I wanted to get publicity because I didn't have an email list at all. So I knew the biggest thing, and at the time I was talking a lot about this with Substack because they were interested in this, because this was an interesting thing of like trying to create a political newsletter from scratch on their platform. And I realized, I was actually really worried about how can I get 10,000 people to sign up for this email list? I didn't know how that was going to be. So obviously, how that was going to be possible. So obviously, getting some media could be interesting. So I started, emailing people, DMing people, and I reached out to the editor-in-chief of Wired, Nicholas, who was Nicholas Thompson at the time.
Yep, that's right.
And he's moved on to a number of other positions since then. But and I just said, hey, I'm quitting my job. I'm starting a newsletter. It's going to be totally based on subscriptions. I think this is an interesting story. Let me know. I'll give it to you as an exclusive. And he got back to me, almost immediately and said, yes, we're interested. And, hooked me up with the reporter, Emily Dreyfus. And that's how it happened. And I actually, sort of planned the date that I announced publicly that I was going to do this with the publication of that article. And I think it was very helpful because it validated that it was something interesting that was going on. I don't think I could make that pitch today because so many people have are now launching newsletters and going independent. It's not that interesting, but at the time that was my pitch, and it had some interest at that point in time.
There's definitely a first mover advantage, but I mean, to kind of apply this more generally, it sounds like finding a really interesting angle, hustling and getting the word out, contacting the right people. And Yeah, what
And to be
other
clear, I offered as an exclusive to probably 6 or 8 people, and he was the one who took me up. You know, it was like the first person who got it was going to get it, but he was the one who took me up on it.
that's great.
So yeah, and I still do that to get, when I have something that I think is important, I still reach out to people, to this, not maybe as often as I would like to, but I definitely make time to do that.
I love to hear that because I don't think it's always in our journalism DNA to like be going out and pitching our own stories to other media outlets unless you're very familiar with freelancing. But it is part of the process of how to grow something from scratch. So it seems pretty important. Can you also, I mean, we can't talk about popular information without talking a little bit about Fake Progress, what another amazing political news site you created. And not necessarily about the transition, but what did you learn about launching Think Progress? And in terms of launching it, introducing a new brand, gaining credibility among your readers and sources. And were there any lessons that you could then apply to the Substack newsletter, or were they completely different beasts?
There were a lot of lessons that I learned. One is, and it was a nonprofit, so we had other sources of funding, but we did have advertising, which was a substantial source of funding for Think Progress.
Hmm.
And I realized what a nightmare it was to try to run a media organization that was based in part on advertising, because it was just so I mean, I had someone full time working on it with me, and it was just so complicated, and the money just kept on going down and down and down, no matter how many page views you got. But one thing I started to do to counteract that was to launch a membership program for Think Progress. It was sort of towards the end, but I did get, by putting a little call to action at the end of our articles, several thousand people paying, I can't remember if it was $5 or $10 a month for nothing. I mean, we weren't offering anything, except just support us. And we weren't getting a ton of pickup, but we were getting a good amount. Not necessarily when you have a 40-person newsroom, but I sort of realized, like, hey, if I could, to get a portion of that, it could maybe support me. So I realized that had potential. And I also, that's when I, started doing a lot of the kind of accountability journalism, that I ended up doing in popular information. It wasn't necessarily the main focus of it, but it certainly was some of the more substantial, successes of Think Progress. One that I think stuck in my mind was after Sandy Hook, we highlighted a number of corporations who offered special discounts through the NRA. And over a period of some months, we actually, through our reporting, ended up causing almost all of those companies to drop off. Made big companies, Delta, Hertz, other folks. And so I think I had that in the back of my mind that, like, it's actually more difficult to do that kind of reporting from within an institution when you're not fully independent, but we did it. And it was effective. And I think, I was kind of drawing on some of those lessons as well, informs, what I do with popular information, and also, really informs what I don't want to do. Because since we were advertising based, we really did have to make sure, you can't just lose, 3 or 4 million or 5 million page views in a month, when you've got people who are relying on you for their payroll. So you had to do a lot of pieces that maybe you didn't want to do, that you knew would be popular, that don't necessarily add anything, but is going to fit into social media algorithms in a certain way, catch a certain wave, and just drive lots of page views. To find something that can get outside of that was also important to me.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you had some hard lessons learned from Think Progress, some of the downsides of the advertising model that really informed how you built the newsletter, popular information. And when you you launched popular information, it's out in the world, looking back, were there some mistakes you made that you would do differently, or did everything kind of go off exactly as planned?
Um, I mean, I definitely made a number of mistakes. I think, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, trying to meet my own expectations of what I thought a good political newsletter was, even if it wasn't something that I was interested in. I remember I spent months, trying to get an interview with Bernie Sanders. So I thought, my readers are going to love a Q&A with Bernie Sanders. And I eventually got it. And one, I'm not really that good at doing Q&As with folks. And secondly, I learned that, it was one of the most, it was extremely unpopular edition. People didn't seem into it. The people who did respond seemed upset about it for one reason or the other, upset about my questions, upset about his answers. And, I just sort of realized, like, hey, why am I doing that? I spent all this time. Like, why am I doing this? So this isn't even what I like to do. I'd rather be doing research. I'd rather be trying to find something new. There's a million interviews of Bernie Sanders all around the internet. So, I think that, and, I think also just you, I think there's an expectation about the path of growth that it's linear, and just I really kind of put myself through the ringer a lot of times as I kind of got down on myself as things didn't, sort of slowed down. And I convinced myself that something was fundamentally wrong with the product and would make, try to make some sort of big change for, a few days or a few weeks, when I didn't realize that actually it's not linear, and this process of things slowing down and then kind of picking up momentum and then slowing down again is generally the path that things take.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as someone who has a much smaller newsletter and feeling like every unsubscribe is like a personal attack and just be like, oh, shoot. No, I thank you for sharing that. First of all, I think that feels very honest and very real in terms of being able to manage your own expectations about what growth means in the context of a creator project, but also the soul searching that's involved with really understanding what your strengths are, your weaknesses, what it takes to read your audience and know exactly who you're trying to reach out to. When so much of the creator journey, I believe, is the content, everything that you write is an expression of your brand, right? Like that is your core product. So the types of stories that you pursue, and how you format them, your style, your voice really comes into play, and in terms of how people experience your brand. That's one piece of marketing as well as the product itself. When you are reporting now, no longer for Think Progress, and you're actually for this new brand that maybe people like or don't know, did you find any difficulties actually doing the reporting and introducing yourself as PI, or were people generally really receptive to you? And were you able to kind of get over that? Like, were there any challenges there when you were trying to do really important journalism while repping your own independent brand that may or may not have become as popular as it is today?
Well, I think that my approach to this was to make sure that my reporting did not depend on getting access to any person. So, regardless of whether someone gets back to me, it can go live. So, the grounding of the reporting is in facts and data. And then, of course, I'm reaching out to folks and giving them an opportunity to respond. If they don't want to take me up on that, then that's their decision. And, I think from the beginning, I got a fair amount of responses, but not everyone. But then as you develop a track record and people see that, oh, it could start in popular information, but then it might go a bunch of other places, or it might get, it might be trending on Twitter the next day. People start responding more often, and as I don't do this as much because I, quite frankly, got bored of it, but I did a lot of reporting on Facebook for a couple of years, probably the middle two years. And, Facebook always got back to me all the time. Google always got back to me. I have a report out today where AT&T is getting back to me. So these are pretty, those are pretty big companies, and they want to get their, they understand that it's an independent newsletter, but it may or may not go farther than that, and they're going to want to get their point of view, and I'm happy to give it to them. And I treat them, they may not think I treat them fairly, but I treat them fairly enough that I put in their statement if they give me, if they give me a statement, and I'll reflect their point of view. So I think that's the approach I take. I don't I think it could be harder if you really were, sometimes you have stories where it really depends on the cooperation from someone else. That might be harder, especially in the beginning, if you really were basing it on that. But I've tried to, I'm not as interested in that kind of reporting anyway, just kind of temperamentally. But that could have been more difficult, but that's not the way that I approach it.
Awesome. No, I think that's very helpful and very tactical in terms of how to get a new brand introduced into the world and start getting the content that you want to create. In terms of the format and the style and the voice, was that something you thought really intentionally about, or did you kind of discover it along the way?
I have made some changes to the format. As I mentioned initially, I was thinking kind of 3 topics a day, and then I found, well, it was getting too long, so I went to 2, and then I
Mm.
did one day I just did one, and people liked it better than any of the other ones, so I kind of just stuck with that. And now, I'll occasionally do something with a couple of different topics, but mostly I always do one topic. So um, that was a big change, as far as your approach, because and then I think, um, over time I've learned that I don't like to go too much above 2,000 words,
Mm.
because I find the longer ones, one, they'll get cut off in the email, if it's too long, and I just don't think people will read the whole thing. And I just think, so I think if I have something that's longer than that, I'll try to divide it up. In fact, in generally, I try not to even do 2,000 words. I found that the readers respond best to something between 1,000 and 1,500. So that's, once I get past 1,000, it's kind of like, just, say what I've got to say, but I can kind of wrap it up. That's kind of how I think about it. I know there's some people who have different, who are very successful, who write much longer newsletters, but a lot of the stuff I'm writing is pretty dense. It can have like a lot of numbers in it. I might be going through some fairly arcane concepts, and I think it's just good to give people, if you're going to do that to people and put that kind of pressure on them, to make it shorter and digestible. So
Mm.
yeah, I think over time, it's developed. And then the only other thing I would say is, I realized that, I feel no obligation anymore, and I used to feel this in the beginning, to cover like a big topic in the news. I'm
Mhm.
not, I feel like I'm only looking for topics where I feel like I can add value. If something's a big topic, I may never discuss it or cover it in any way, and and that's okay, because I know readers are not going to be expecting that from me. If you want to know what's the biggest news of the day, look at the front page of the New York Times webpage, or your local paper, or whatever you want to do. That's not what you're getting from me. So I don't try to force myself into a topic just because I feel like it's a big news topic, especially if I don't feel like I have something that I can add or report.
Yeah, I know these are clearly like really hard earned takeaways that you've had over the course of these past few years. You mentioned something that I want to just get some more clarification on. You knew that readers didn't like it, or whether or not it was the 3 topics, the 1 topic, 2,000 words or not. Super straightforward, but how did you know people didn't like it? Were you getting email feedback? Were you seeing like a decline or an increase in subscribers? Like what were you basing that information off of?
I have a lot of different signals that I look at. Certainly, there's just the direct email. Every newsletter I'll get, usually few dozen responses. People can just respond right back. So I'll get that. Sometimes I'll get many more. And so you can get a sense from that. Although it's important not to overread it, because that's obviously a very small percentage of your audience that's has time to do that. But that's one signal. I also am looking on Twitter, which ones are kind of reverberating out. Am
Mm.
I getting 100 retweets, or am I getting 5,000 retweets for this thread about the thing? That can be important, and that's another signal. Also, how many new subscribers am I getting? Am I getting 5 new subscribers? Am I getting 500 new subscribers? If something's generating a lot of new subscribers, that's a signal. How many subscribers are converting from the free version to the paid version in response to this article? That's another signal. So you kind of take all of that together, And if you're getting like lots of positive, if you're getting tons of retweets and people are emailing in thanking you so much for doing this, and you're getting new free subscribers and your old free subscribers are converting, well, you've hit on something. If you're not getting many responses or you're getting negative responses, if it's not reverberating, if there's no pickup anywhere else, then that's less positive. Now, you can't overinterpret that because sometimes, um, the people just aren't there yet and you're on to something important. And I'll just quickly, I'll just say probably the story that I had the biggest impact was when me and my research assistant, because I had one at the time, we contacted immediately after January 6th, we contacted 144 companies that had given to at least one member of Congress that voted to overturn the election, and asked them if they planned on continuing to donate to those members. We got 3 responses saying they wouldn't, and then that created like a whole, it created a whole vein of reporting that continues to this day, both on Popular Information and in many other media outlets.
Mhm.
But what people paid less attention to was actually the morning of January 6th, before there was the attack, we did a very similar report about the 20 biggest corporate donors to the members that we believed were planning to vote against confirming the electoral college that day. That newsletter got very little attention at
Yeah.
all, but it was sort of like we needed to just keep. I mean, obviously there was an attack on the Capitol that changed the dynamics of it, but I wasn't going to. I could have just decided like, oh well, we've already done that. We tried it, or we can just retweet the same thing out and see if we can get. But I just wanted to keep going at it because I felt like people and the corporate world were going to come around to kind of where we were with our reporting.
That's fantastic. And I want to invite everyone in the audience. We're going to actually be opening up to Q&A. I have one last question for you, Judd. It will be my last one. But yeah, I appreciate that case study example, and just in terms of what you were thinking and how you made that decision that ultimately led to the reporting that gave a huge boost in PI subscribers. Just as a parting gift, what would be 3 pieces of advice you'd give to the creators we have in this room about how to think about their project at an early stage? It could be summarizing some of the points you made, but if you could just help us prioritize some key takeaways to think about and apply to our projects, our businesses, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, I'd say number one, identify your strengths and lean into them. Especially this is a more crowded marketplace now. Figure out what you have to offer, where you can provide unique value, and really put a heavy emphasis on that. The second thing I would say is to expect, even if your effort is consistent, to expect uneven results, that it's a fickle world, and not to get discouraged if you don't immediately meet success, or if you meet success and things start slowing down. That this is not something that is predictable over time, especially with a recurring revenue model. You can get a lot of stability and predictability. I mean, I think at this point it's a very stable source of income for me, but it's the product of a lot of unstable, unpredictable events is what brought me there. And thirdly, I would just say that you should just recognize that with all of the benefits from being a creator, all the independence, all the creative freedom of running your own thing, the one thing that comes along with it is an obligation to be your own marketer. One thing I say to some people, because I've talked to a lot of people over the years who are thinking about starting things, is like, if you build it, people will not come. You have to tell them about it. And so I think that you just need to understand, if you're going to dive into this, that that's part of the job, and it's always part of the job. Because if you're not building, you're getting smaller. I mean, that's just what happens. I don't have a very high churn rate, but people do unsubscribe. People do decide not to be paid subscribers anymore. And so if you want to not get smaller, you've got to build up faster than those people are going away. So I think those would be my 3 pieces of advice. You just need to know that going in, that you can't, it kind of it's not the most fun part, but it's the part that makes all the other really fun parts possible.
So good, Judd. That was really great. No, thank you for sharing that. We're going to hand it off to audience questions. Jeremy, were there any audience questions from the chat, or does anyone want to raise their hand in the Zoom call and ask Judd a question?
There are lots of good questions in the chat. One from Melissa about whether to put certain pieces behind a paywall. I know, Judd, you've been very open in terms of letting everyone read your content. Isabel was asking about audience research and kind of laying the groundwork for the project before you began.
Let's start with the first one. Not to go, not to inundate too many at once. Judd, do you want to answer that first one about?
Yeah, I had a paywall for a couple of years from launch, and you know, I initially sort of decided I was going to have 2 free and 2 paid, and I stuck with that for a while until March 2020, and that worked fine. But one thing I realized at the time too was that the paid newsletters, when you put it behind a paywall, it's a much less powerful marketing tool for you. Many fewer people are going to be able to read it. It doesn't get shared as well on Twitter. You know, even if you sort of summarize it, link to it, people don't like to share things that are behind a paywall. So I quickly realized it's very important to make sure your best stuff is not behind a paywall, because that's your calling card. Then when the pandemic hit, I got into a vein of reporting that is probably the stuff that I'm the most proud of, to be honest with you, about the working conditions of people in restaurants and supermarkets and cable technicians, and kind of went down the line, pizza delivery people. And I just did not feel right putting that content behind a paywall. I felt like to make it meaningful, everyone needed to read it. So I sort of made an announcement on a lark that I was taking down my paywall for the length of the pandemic. Of course, at the time, this was March 2020. I thought, well, what could that be? A month, 2 months? You know, who knows how long this will last? But I've kept with that ever since because, one, because I made a commitment to do so. Secondly, because I found that it actually accelerated, not decreased, my growth, because it allowed all 4 newsletters every week to grow. It also gives you more opportunity to hit your entire list and give them a pitch to go paid. Now, there are a lot of people who are doing newsletters who make extensive use of their paywalls, and that can be very effective. But so I'm not saying that paywalls are bad and making everything free is good. For me, it feels good. It feels like it's in concert with the type of work that I'm doing, and it's a positive for growth. I certainly think no matter what, you don't need to put, a ton, like everything behind a paywall and only have an occasional free one. That you want to have at least a good mix so that people, especially in the beginning, so that people can get to understand your content.
That's great. No, thank you, Jeremy, and Judd and Isabel. Just to follow up, Jeremy mentioned this. How much audience research did you do beforehand? That's what she's asking. And did you worry about whether or not there was a market for this, or did you just kind of go with your gut and what you're good at? You kind of talked about you went with what you're good at, but yeah, the original question:
no audience research, none.
No audience research. Okay.
I wouldn't even really know how to do it because I didn't really have an audience to research because I didn't have an email list. But I did have years of experience creating things and then watching what does well online and what doesn't. So I took that, kind of life research, and I don't think all the conclusions that I took from that really ended up applying that well to a newsletter, but that's, I had that, at least that experience of how to evaluate and how to think about it. Since then, I did do one audience survey and just found out a little bit about the audience. I probably should do another one. It was, I think, a couple of years ago now, but so I have done that, and that helped me. That helped me a bit. So I'm interested in learning about my audience as much as I can, but that wasn't really my approach to launching the newsletter itself.
Awesome, thank you. Yogesh also asked in the chat earlier, every story has 2 sides. Before starting to write about a particular angle, what basis or process do you follow to start writing about it?
To start How do I
Writing.
decide? How do I decide what to write about?
Yeah, like a particular story angle, it seems, just knowing that there's many ways to attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think about I'm really focused on where can I add some value? Where can I expose someone to an idea or information that they might not already be familiar with? Because that's the stuff that I enjoy, and I know from experience that's the stuff that's best for the business too. So that's really how I approach it. So I'm looking at, and I was doing this right before I got on this call, to be honest with you. I was talking to my research assistants and looking through and figuring out a couple of possibilities. And, eventually you have to pull the trigger, because every morning at 6:30, Monday through Thursday, I'm writing something. I mean, I'm publishing something, and I've never missed. And I think that's an important discipline to have, and it's something that's easy to lose track of because there is no one. If I didn't do it, most people probably wouldn't notice, for one, because they get a lot of emails, and nobody would be like, telling me that I did something wrong. Um, but imposing that discipline is important to providing a product that you think people might be willing to pay for. So anyway, the short answer is I'm looking for value. I'm looking for something that fits into what I've come to understand is the core value of the newsletter itself, which is accountability journalism. So is this something that is holding a powerful person or entity accountable for something that they did? And if that's the case, that is probably a good approach for me.
Yeah. Is it fair to also just piggyback on that question that you also are trying to figure out what is doable in a particular time frame because you are committed and trying to deliver on a newsletter every, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have different time frames. I have some things that I'll work on for weeks or months. And I know, look, I've got to do this research. I've got to talk to these people. I've got to, we did a whole investigation on Red Lobster that was probably, I think I was talking about that for 6 or 8 months, and it took me a really long time to just find people from Red Lobster, find the data, find the experts, but I really wanted to do it, and we did it. I did it in partnership actually with another media outlet called More Perfect Union. Had a video component too, but it took a long time. There's other things like whatever I write for tomorrow, and I'm not 100% sure what my topic will be for tomorrow yet. I will let everyone know. I've got a couple of things that we're kind of looking at right now, that are produced within the span of a day, and that's another one. And then I've got others that, like the one that published today, probably had 4 or 5 days of research and work behind it before it got published. So because it involved not FEC reports, campaign finance reports from the Texas Ethics Commission, and reaching out to companies, giving them a chance to respond, et cetera, et cetera. So there's different. It definitely is a thing, and it's a matter of if I don't have something, then I need to pick something, and it's not just the best thing, it also has to be the best thing that I can get done, sometime this evening, so it'll be ready to go for tomorrow.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense on it. I really want to thank you so much for coming to chat with all of us. Judd, you've been awesome. It's been such a transparent conversation, and it's very rare to have. And I want to thank everyone here for attending, just being a part of this community. Please lean in, and it's not over. We have 1 more minute, and we're going to be breaking out to breakout sessions for people to just meet and greet everyone, including myself and Hillary. But Judd, we're going to let you go. Thank you so much. Truly.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Awesome. Yeah. Take care. And yeah, for everyone else, yes, Jeremy, I'm going to echo that. Please apply to our 100-day online journalism creators program and stop by our online open house this Wednesday. This is just one of many series we have planned this year to really dive a little bit deeper into what it means to be a creator. So with that, I'm going to actually hand it off to Jeremy and our awesome team member, Charlotte, who's going to be organizing the breakout sessions. Thanks, everyone.
Event, hopefully coming up soon.
Thanks, Jeremy.
February 2nd, right?
I actually don't even have it in front of me, but that sounds right. That sounds,
Okay.
I know. Yeah. It's it's an incredible lineup, and I know the Nest Labs founder is going to be one of them ones that's coming up, so that'll be a great one. She's really on
Awesome.
there. It's terrific. Yeah. Hopefully see you
Okay.
there.
Thank you. Have a good
Bye,
day,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.